Tonight, we are watching a story that we have seen play out before, but we are praying that it does not happen in the same way again. In the last 24 hours, the United States of America launched airstrikes across Venezuela, conducting a massive, lightning-fast, powerful special operations raid that took out Venezuela's military capabilities. It captured Nicolas Maduro and his wife. It flew them out of Caracas and into U.S. custody, where they will face terrorism charges. President Trump has now said that the United States of America will run Venezuela for a period of time. We will tap its vast oil reserves while a safe transitional government is put into place. Now, the scariest part of that is that there is a faction still inside of Venezuela that hates America. Venezuela's remaining leadership has declared a national emergency, and what they have done is condemn this operation as military aggression, an act of war. They say that this took place as explosions and blackouts are still reported across Caracas and several coastal states. So what we see happen next might be a worst-case scenario. To know how bad things could get, we have to remember where we have been. In Syria, peaceful protest in the year 2011 spiraled into all-out civil war. That took place when a brutal crackdown turned the streets into a battlefield. It drew in every regional power. In Libya, airstrikes and regime change opened the door for warring militias and a permanent state of chaos after the U.S. went in and Gaddafi fell. In Iraq, with America's removal of Saddam Hussein, the disbanding of the army, and the demilitarization, we saw the creation of a vacuum that birthed an insurgency and eventually ISIS. In Afghanistan and across the border into Pakistan, we saw a quick intervention turn into a 20-year war and a militant resurgence after the withdrawal. Now we can apply those dark lessons to Venezuela. In the next few days, the immediate danger is a rapid fragmentation of power. Maduro is gone, but his networks are not. There's an active loyalist party in the military and the intelligence services. Armed members of the barrios have massive access to weapons. They have local legitimacy, and they have deep ties to drug and smuggling routes. In a worst-case scenario, those factions will refuse U.S.-backed transitional authority. You'll get dueling claims of legitimacy inside of Venezuela. A U.S.-approved interim government in the presidential palace, and then rival resistance councils that will rally supporters in the streets of the country. You'll see pro and anti-U.S. crowds fighting in the streets. Local commanders may defect with their units, and the barracks and leadership will begin to split down the middle. We do know that there are power grids that were hit, radar sites that were completely decimated by U.S. strikes, and those could stay offline. We could see rolling blackouts spread across the country, food and fuel supplies that were already fragile due to years of crisis begin to collapse further. Supermarket lines could turn from places of wait into waiting places of riots and violence. Armed gangs, some of them loyal to the Maduro administration, some of them purely criminal. They will start checkpoint shakedowns, kidnappings, and lootings. You can see the Venezuelan people caught in the middle of a fight that they did not choose, but now they have to choose a side. This is just like Pakistan, just like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. Within weeks, the worst case scenario is not just unrest. It's organized insurgency. You start to see familiar patterns from Iraq and Syria. Maybe roadside explosives hitting U.S. patrols and allied vehicles. Ambushes in dense neighborhoods where American armor means less and local knowledge means everything. You could see attacks on pipelines, attacks on the refineries, attacks on oil terminals that will choke off the resources that Washington says that it's trying to stabilize. Every single civilian casualty from this point forward, whether it was legitimate or accidental, every raid, every clip of a fight will draw propaganda from the insurgents. Outside leftist groups across Latin America and extremist elements worldwide are branding the U.S. presence as an occupancy. You will see foreign fighters trickle in the way that they did in Syria. Only this time, it's to the Americas. The mission that started out as a capture of Maduro and securing the oil risks sliding toward open-ended nation building. The lessons that we have learned the hard way before become a real reality for us today. And then there's Colombia, Brazil, the Caribbean. To Venezuela's left, you have Colombia, their west, already dealing with their own dissidents, the ELN guerrillas, their own narco-trafficking. To the south and the east, you have Brazil and Guyana, both with stakes to regional oil and security. If Venezuela collapses into a prolonged insurgency here, you will see these borders blur. At the worst case scenario, armed groups will use jungle borderlands as safe havens. They'll slip back and forth just like the insurgents did between Afghanistan and Pakistan. They will stage their attacks and then they will melt back across the line. Refugees will pour into Colombia, Brazil, the Caribbean by the hundreds of thousands. You'll see local governments straining. Local economies will be under pressure. Crime will spike. You'll see border skirmishes erupt as nervous militaries fire on suspecting infiltrators. And then you have Cuban and Nicaraguan governments. They would offer themselves as mediators. In reality, they would become staging grounds for Russian and Chinese intelligence. Russian logistics, Chinese electronic warfare, each one of these aimed at undermining the U.S. mission. At that point, this isn't just a Venezuelan crisis. This is a regional security emergency. And then we come to one of the most dangerous parts of this scenario that almost no one in mainstream wants to talk about. Cartel blowback on U.S. soil. For years, elements inside of the Maduro regime have been accused of working hand in hand or hand in glove with drug trafficking organizations. Groups like the Cartel of the Suns inside of the Venezuelan military and intelligence services. These networks will not vanish just because Maduro is in an American holding cell. They have partners that stretch across Latin America. They have Mexican cartel partners, and they have deep groups seated inside of the USA. In a worst case, cartel leaders who saw Maduro as an ally or maybe a guarantor of their operations, they will decide that Washington's operation is not just an arrest, it's a declaration of war on their business. How are they going to respond? They won't respond with speeches at the United Nations. They will respond with undeniable violence. You could see a sharp surge in lethal, highly potent narcotics being shipped into American cities, both as punishment and as leverage. You will see coordinated attacks on rival groups inside the USA that will create a wave of brutal, headline-grabbing, overwhelming violence that really gets the attention of law enforcement. You might see targeted killings or kidnapping plots against individuals inside the USA or Americans in South America. The cartels do not operate under a flag and they do not need a capital. They weaponize their chaos. And the more stretched the U.S. becomes overseas, the more room these networks will have to operate. Then there's the power angle of the proxy war that we're seeing in the entire hemisphere. Publicly, you'll see Beijing of China and Russia. They will condemn these strikes as crimes of aggression. Their resolutions, of course, will get vetoed. But that's not where the game is being played. In a worst case, they move to make Venezuela Washington's closest Afghanistan. A grinding, politically divisive quagmire without ever firing a shot on U.S. soil. Russia, with its own long-standing ties to Caracas, can quietly funnel weapons, push in adversaries, and manipulate cyber capabilities to loyalist factions and neighboring regions. They can push in old air defense systems. They can use drone and jamming technology. They can allow intelligence to be pushed into Venezuela that supports a Venezuelan jungle warfare campaign. The model is very simple. It's what the USA did for the Soviets in 1980s Afghanistan. Moscow and China will now do this to 2026 Washington, D.C. China, for its part, will wield financial and trade power. They've already fast-tracked their resources and infrastructural deals. They will use every government that's willing to distance itself from Washington. They'll offer investments into Brazil, Argentina. They'll give it to others in exchange for denying the ability for the Americans to base, overflight technology, logistical support. They'll ramp up their own cyber operations against U.S. energy infrastructure, our financial markets. They will probe for vulnerabilities under the cover of patriotic hackers. This goal won't be to save Maduro. He's done. He's already in custody. The goal will be to make the price of removing Maduro so steep that America will think twice about challenging China or Russia in any of their interests across the world. Venezuela holds on to some of the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, particularly in one of their belts that has a significant deposit of gold and other minerals. At a best-case scenario, a stable transition will increase production. It will lower the prices over time, but that's not what we're looking at tonight. In the worst-case scenario, we'll see missiles and mortars landing near refineries. Engineers will flee. Pipelines will begin to be sabotaged, just like they are across Ukraine and Russia. Insurance costs for tankers in the Caribbean will skyrocket, and we will see a finalization of the collapse. You'll see oil futures spike. Brent crude will go past recent levels. Traders will begin to price in the risk of operation. Global shipping routes through the Caribbean, toward Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, toward the Panama Canal will become risk zones. That hits the U.S., it hits you, and it hits me on an economic level. Fuel prices could jump. Families in America squeezed economically even further. Equity markets will sell off their hard assets, especially in energy-sensitive sectors like manufacturing or the emerging markets. Safe haven assets, the U.S. dollar, treasuries, gold, those will move sharply as investors flee their risk. At the same time, Washington is eyeing not just the gold, but lithium. Those lithium deposits could feed years of next-generation batteries and military technology, and controlling these resources and the lanes of transportation for them become a core objective of the operation, whether Donald Trump says it or not. Now you look at Venezuela's coastline. You have its ports. You're a short sail from the Panama Canal or to major Gulf refineries. You're short in distance from the Atlantic shipping lanes that carry energy and commodities around the world. A U.S.-run Venezuela will effectively extend American control over a huge slice of this region. Now, for Washington strategists that are worried about Chinese shipping influence creeping into the Western Hemisphere, it's a tempting prize. For Beijing and Moscow, it's a red line that America just crossed. At the worst case, we'll see naval posturing that is reminiscent of the Cold War. Russian advisory ships will continue to visit Cuban and Venezuelan ports that will be controlled by local loyalists. Chinese surveillance vessels could begin to loiter in international waters just outside of U.S. declared security zones. You might see near-miss incidents between warships and aircraft that could escalate with a single, just one, miscalculation. Suddenly, we're not talking about Maduro. We're no longer worried about drug trafficking. We're talking about who owns these shipping lanes, who sets the rules of trade around the sea, and who gets pushed into the margins of the hemisphere. Now, if you strip away everything that the press conferences say and you start to look at the incentives In a worst-case reading of what is happening, the U.S. moves into Venezuela not for narco-terrorism charges or humanitarian concerns. We just took Venezuela to secure cheap, proximate oil at a time of global instability. We'll lock down gold, take rare metals, possibly take over lithium sources before China can. We will control key maritime routes in the Caribbean and protect the approaches, the seas and lanes of travel to the Gulf of America and Panama. We'll push Russian and Chinese military assets and intelligence assets out of South America, and we will reassert U.S. primacy in the region. Those aims, of course, align with America's security interests. They might even, over the long term, help stabilize our own economic position in the hemisphere. But in the short term, even in the medium, they raise the stake of every firefight in Caracas and every cyber probe of a Houston refinery. Remember, the more vital the prize, the more no country wants to blink. The lessons that we learned in Syria, Egypt, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, those are coming back to haunt us. In Syria, what began as protests against an authoritarian regime devolved quickly into a multi-sided proxy nightmare that drew in Iran, Russia, Turkey, and the USA. It created jihadist groups. In Egypt, we saw a revolution, an election, and a military coup that was cycling in a country through hope, chaos, and a return to a strongman's rule. In Libya, you saw the fall of Gaddafi, and that did not bring a rise to freedom. It meant that rival governments, militias, and foreign mercenaries came in, and they carved up the entire country. In Iraq, our so-called mission accomplished gave way to roadside bombing, sectarian cleansing, and the birth of ISIS, which we still fight today. In Afghanistan and Pakistan, we saw terrorists, warlords, and intelligence services that were used in the borderlands, turning an intervention into a multi-generational struggle. Now, this worst-case scenario is that in Venezuela, we did not just topple a dictator. We're repeating every mistake, but not on the other side of the world. Just a 3-hour flight from Miami. So where does that leave us? Well, I think we can all realize that Nicolas Maduro was not the best leader of Venezuela. He turned the country into economic ruin. He partnered with dangerous criminal networks. He threatened U.S. interests, not just this year, but for years. We can support our men and women in uniform, but we have to understand that this is an extremely dangerous series of operations we are entering into. The smoke is still rising. You know it's happening right now. And before this becomes another open-ended commitment that will drain our resources, we have to watch out for a couple of warning signs. In the coming days and weeks, I want you to keep a close eye out for a rapid escalation of street violence inside of Venezuela, especially targeted against U.S. allied forces or facilities. Look out for refugees to begin flowing and spiking into Colombia, Brazil, and the Caribbean. Watch out for credible reports of cartel-linked violence and drug surges here inside of America on U.S. soil. And watch for China and Russia to move their naval deployments and cyber attacking assets into the region. America, your country, has the right to defend itself. We do, of course, owe it to our citizens here at home. We have to be honest about the risk. We have to demand a strategy that avoids turning Venezuela into just another Syria. Folks, you're watching Full Spectrum Survival here on YouTube. Please keep a very close eye on this. This was a potential catalyst event. One thing that might snowball very soon into a series of locally destabilizing events in your cities and states. Now is the time to be prepared. Please share this video off of YouTube with friends and family. Share it through links and email, on Facebook, x.com, really anywhere that you want to get this information out to, because this was one 24-hour period, and it will turn into a constant fight. No enemy goes down idly. Thank you guys for being here with us. From my family to yours, please stay safe. Make sure you're subscribed to Full Spectrum Survival, YouTube's original prepper news channel. And as always, keep watch.